how I like to crank out my rows using my Sentro circular knitting machine. This is part 2 that will specifically talk about how I like to start to crank out my rows. If you missed part 1, that's the initial setup on how to cast on. I have that linked in the video description below. Let's get going on cranking out our rows so you can start making some amazing projects. Part 1, we just finished our initial cast on, and now we're going to start our first row. But before we do that, you want to check to make sure that there's no yarns on top of these big pegs. The yarn needs to be pushed underneath. This is how you can get drop stitches at any point during your project. So I stopped the cast on at my 47th needle because my 48th needle is where I started. So I don't want to put the yarn underneath my 48th needle yet. First, it needs to go into the yarn holder. And you want the yarn to go from the front all the way to the back. And it kind of looks like a little tongue sticking out. If your yarn looks like this and is not all the way down into the front, the needles are not going to catch the yarn and you will also get drop stitches. So have it completely seated down to the front, all the way to the back, and then we're going to put it in the yarn tensioner. There are 3 holes. I usually like the middle hole for the number, a medium weight yarn like this. And then I like to put my yarn in a bowl on the floor in front of my machine. So now we're going to start cranking out our rows. Using my right hand, I'm going to crank forward using the lever on the machine. But you will notice with my left hand, I am not just relying on the tension holder, I'm using my left hand for tension. The tension holder I really just use as a guide for the yarn, and between my thumb and my pointer finger, I'm not holding it tightly down, I'm just giving it slight tension on the yarn. As we crank out rows, the yarn skein itself is going to have less and less yarn, so it's going to be creating less and less tension. So I use my left hand to compensate for that tension. So I have found by doing this, I'm not getting those drop stitches halfway through my project because my left hand is creating even tension. Another added benefit is your left hand will fill any knots or factory knots that have formed in the yarn before it goes up into your machine so you don't jam it. You can remove the knots and then continue to crank on. If you have a factory knot, I have linked in the video description below how to remove factory knots and how to re-put on that yarn back onto your machine. I've also found I get less tuck stitches cranking my rows out this way. So hit that like and follow button for part 3 and happy crafting, everybody.